My serial killer investigation was on Albert Fish. Albert Hamilton Fish was an American sadomasochistic serial killer and cannibal. He was born on May 19, 1870. He was the youngest of 4 siblings, and he came from a long line of mental illness. His mother was forced to put Fish in an orphanage at a young age when his father suddenly passed away in 1875. The orphanage is where it is believed that Fish developed his perversions that defined him later on in life. He was beat regularly at the orphanage and whipped. He often enjoyed these beatings and even gained erections from them. Fish spent 4 years there, and in 1879 his mother was finally able to take him out of the orphanage, but the damage was already done. He started a homosexual relationship at the age of 12, and the boy that he had this relationship with introduced him to practices such as drinking urine and coprophagia. He arrived in New York City in 1890 and became a male prostitute. Its typology is that under the category of hedonistic because he gained sexual satisfaction from raping, killing, mutilating, and sometimes eating his victims. He was a sadomasochist who indulged in self-mutilation and driving needles into his rectum. He would stuff cotton balls soaked in lighter fluid into his rectum and set fire to them. It is believed that Fish not only consumed the flesh of his victims, but also drank their urine, blood, and excrement. He believed that God told him to hurt and castrate little boys, and doctors believed that he suffered from religious psychosis. His modus operandi would be that he used the same tools on his victims. He called his weapons implements of hell. Some of his weapons were a cleaver, saw, and a butcher knife. He would beat and torture his victims. Death was almost always by strangulation, and he indulged in eating their flesh once they were dead. He claimed to have had children in every state, but he only confessed to 3 murders. Victim number 1 was Francis McDonald, age 8, murdered July 15, 1920. He was playing outside with his friends when Fish called him over and they wandered off together. A neighbor later on stated that he had seen the boy go off with an elderly man into the woods. It was not until dinner time that Francis was actually realized to be missing. His father was a police officer and organized a search party. They found his body in the woods under some branches. He was found naked and had been horribly beaten and strangled to death by his suspenders. Victim number 2 is Billy Gaffney, age 4, murdered February 11, 1927. Billy disappeared from the hallway outside his apartment where he was playing with a neighbor boy. An older child noticed that the 2 boys were missing, and one was later found on the roof. When the boy was asked where his friend was, he simply stated that the boogeyman had gotten him. They did not find Billy, and it was not until Fish confessed that they knew about the murder. He bound and gagged him, stripped him naked, and left him in an abandoned house. He came back the next day and brought tools to cut him up and drank his blood. He ate pieces of Billy, mainly his penis, ears, nose, and pieces of his face and belly. The rest of him he threw along the road going to North Beach. Victim number 3 is one of the most famous of all the cases. It was Grace Budd, age 10. She was murdered June 3rd, 1928. Albert Fish called upon the Budds' home, answering a classified that one of the older sons, Edward, had placed. Fish went under the alias of Frank Howard, who was supposedly a farmer looking for workers. He had originally planned on killing the boy, but when he saw Grace, he was immediately fixated with her and decided that he was going to kill her instead. He lured her to an abandoned house under the false pretenses that he was taking her to his niece's birthday party. Unsuspecting to what Fish had planned, Grace was outside picking flowers when Fish called her inside the house, where she found him naked, and he strangled her to death and was sexually aroused upon completing this act. He decapitated her body and ate her and discarded the rest of her remains that he did not eat. The investigation, the day after Grace went missing, her brother went to the police station to report her disappearance. Much to the alarm of the Budd family, the address Mr. Howard had given them was fake and there was no farm. There was a task force of 20 plus detectives who had been assigned to the case. They had a couple of solid clues. Police had found the Western Union office in Manhattan where he had sent his message to the Budds. plus his original handwritten message. Analyzing the writing and grammar of the message, the team believed that they had someone of some education and refinement that they were dealing with. East Harlem became a focal point of intense search and investigation since the messages were linked to this area. The search continued. Police photographers, Manhattan fingerprint experts, and 250 plainclothesmen were all enlisted on the case. They had several promising suspects, but none of them matched the description of an older, gray-haired elderly man. In November 1934, the Bud case was still open with one man on the task force. It was Detective King. He would place phony tips with a local column writer, and this writer would write columns that would say that they were close to finding out who the killer was. Within 10 days of doing this, that year, Miss Bud received a letter in the mail, and it described in horrifying detail what had happened to Grace Bud in 1928. The letter was addressed on an envelope with the emblem NYPCBA, which stood for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. They were able to link the writing in the letter to the messages sent to the Bud home in 1928. The envelope brought them to a rooming house in New York, where a janitor had recently rented out the room and had taken the paper from his place of work. The room was being rented out by Fish, and on December 13, 1934, he was apprehended by Detective King. His trial and execution. Upon Fish's arrest for the murder of Grace Bud, he was tried on March 11, 1934. The trial lasted 10 days. Fish tried to plead insanity, and several psychiatrists were in disagreement as to whether or not Fish was insane. The jury found him to be sane and guilty, and the judge ordered the death sentence. Fish arrived at Sing Sing in March of 1935 and was executed on January 16, 1936 by the electric chair. He entered the chamber at 11:06 p.m. and was pronounced dead 3 minutes later. He is buried in the Sing Sing Prison Cemetery. This right here is the letter that Miss Bud had received in 1934 that implicated Albert Fish in the murder of her daughter in 1928. This is a picture of Fish and the electric chair. And this is an x-ray of his pelvic area that shows 29 needles. He was a masochist, so he would stick these needles in his rectum for satisfaction. This is the picture of the crime scene that they had in 1934 of Grace. They were looking for any clues, anything, pieces, remains of her body there. This is a picture of Grace Bud. She's right here on the right with her brother and sister. She was 10 years old when she died. This just shows a search team looking for her remains. The house was called Wisteria Cottage, hence Fish's nickname, Werewolf of Wisteria. Thank you.